Hello, everybody. Welcome to Recover and Reset, Student Mental Health After COVID-19. I'm Louise Chun. I'm the founder of welldoing.org. We help people find therapists, and I'm particularly keen to present this event as we've had so many students reaching out for help with therapy and counselling during the COVID period. So what are we going to talk about during the next hour or so? We're going to break it into several parts. What has happened to university life since March 2020 and how it has differed from the promise it carried before, how students have been affected, how things are now as students return to campus, what can be done in the future to help students to deal with everyday life in which further restrictions are still possible. I'll be convening the panel, and joining me are Julia Samuel, renowned grief counsellor, author of Grief Works and This Too Shall Pass. She's also Vice President of the BACP, the main therapy membership organisation. Simon Rudd is a therapist on welldoing.org. He works in London and he has also worked in student counselling. Libby Mills is a sociology and criminology student at Sussex University, who's writing her dissertation on the subject of post-traumatic growth. And Ras.I Martin, first-year student in politics, philosophy and economics at Lady Margaret Hall, Oxford. I thought I'd start with a little bit of information, as if you don't already know it, about the pandemic. But the reporting of facts and opinion around it have not been without controversy. So there's plenty of stuff we don't actually know, but we do know that there have been 128,000 deaths in the UK and 4.44 million cases of coronavirus. Until we have further investigation, some of the details are still sketchy, but we do know that those who died were predominantly over 80. Much of the lockdown logic was to protect older people and those with existing health conditions from infection and further spreading of the virus. Some commentators felt it was unfair to students to be so restricted when they were unlikely to be seriously affected. Many said that the 3 years or so of a university education mark a special, almost magical time in a person's life, open to new ideas with few responsibilities and the chance to meet a much wider range of people and hear opinions than many will ever have seen or heard before. So I wanted to start by asking Libby and Ras.I, what has it been like at your universities, Sussex and Oxford, respectively, since March 2020? Did people feel annoyed about the lockdowns, or were they largely compliant? And how did it measure up to your dreams of university? So Libby, could you start?
So I think one thing that is definitely important to say is I think I definitely can't speak on the whole, behalf of every single student and every different. It's the same with each lockdown, and this past year for some people it's been incredibly difficult, and some people have had to fight battles that other people really haven't, and for some people it's been almost a blessing. Completely depends on your circumstance. But I remember, so I did a foundation year 4 years ago, but I was in my second year of my undergrad degree last year, and at first it was kind of, I don't know, it was almost like, is this real? Because no one had ever really been through anything like this before. It was, so I remember I was driving with my friend and we were like, we need to find the right radio station, find it, the one that Boris is talking on, blah, blah, blah. And we found it, and it was such a moment that's now kind of etched in my memory. And it was kind of, at first it took a while, I think, for everybody to realise, separate from even students, this is really happening, and, this is something where these kind of restrictions, particularly I think in a world where we're so unrestricted, to then suddenly be really restricted daily, virtually everything, like it was a huge a huge thing to wrap your head around, separate to the actually doing it. But most of my friends were actually in their final year last year, and I know, just from my own friends, I know that it was a huge struggle. I know that the whole kind of, it went from 0 to 100 very quickly. It was kind of whispers at first, wasn't it, of COVID, and oh, like, and I'm quite a, I don't know, I'm like, until I have to worry about something, I'm quite like, like, until it's really knocking on my door, I don't really think too much of things. And so to suddenly, have to adapt. And I think that I know that my friends who were in final year struggled a lot. And particularly one of my friends, she was doing a drama course, and the whole change of having such a physical degree to then having to change and doing it all virtually was incredibly difficult. It was nobody's fault, but having to kind of, there's a grief in that, I think, of like having to grieve your final year. And then I think it was definitely, it's been really difficult. It has.
Thanks, Libby. That's interesting. What about you, Ras.I? Because you this is actually your first year, but you also did a foundation year, so you'd already had a year, right? And then this change.
How
did you find it?
I think the kind of, it changed over time. I think at first it was kind of disbelief. Again, kind of, I can't speak on behalf of everyone, but kind of what I saw from my peers, both at Oxford and then also back home, was kind of this disbelief that this isn't something that bad. The media's kind of just hyping it up and stuff, and actually in reality it's not that deep. And I think a lot of people, I remember like comparing it to swine flu. It will come and go. Swine flu was a big thing, kind of was a serious issue to some extent, but wasn't that bad. And I remember at the end of like our second term here, there was like kind of, as things were getting a bit more intense before the lockdown, and I remember there was kind of a lot of people going to clubs, and I was kind of saying, perhaps it's not the best idea. And I remember a lot of people like, no, it's swine flu. This will pass. We're young and we're healthy type thing. And then I think we all went back home, and lockdown started. And I think the reality of it really kicked in, the kind of severity of it also, kind of just looking at France and also looking at Iran, and seeing how serious and how kind of how fast it spread also. And I think fear took over, and I think that kind of element of fear kept a lot of, kept myself and my other kind of young people that I saw and I've interacted with, kind of kept them inside and kept them from staying, kind of following the lockdown rules. And I think as time progressed, the kind of fear kind of wore off. And I think people became less fearful, and kind of decided, again, I'm young, kind of took that old mentality and said, I'm young, I can kind of I'll survive this. If I get ill, it's not that deep and whatever. And I think that's how it changed. But I think overall, again, it was a tough process. It was a really tough process. And I think it was from this kind of key moment of socializing in your life. University is meant to be this place where people advertise it, and you really find yourself, and you find yourself partly in the kind of interactions you have with people. So when that's stripped away from you, and all you're left to is this the kind of the stressful aspects of doing work, doing essays and reading and problem sheets and all of these different things, and you don't have this kind of releases that come from social interactions. I think it really kind of makes the whole experience of university a lot more stressful and a lot harder, I think, and harder to kind of keep on going. That's been the experience, at least from my perspective.
That's great. Thanks, both of you. Simon, you've got student clients and you've been involved in student counselling. What sort of things have you seen in terms of student mental health?
Yeah, thank you. And it's nice to be here with you all. I think first thing I'd say is a significant amount of isolation and loneliness among students, and a huge rise in referrals. We've seen it for the last few years. Student referrals have increased, but this year's particularly has happened. And within that, there's sort of that collective idea. There's amazingly different stories, like Libby and Ras.I have mentioned. International students who couldn't get home and now stuck in the UK without support. estranged students, you know, where do they go? Do they stay in an empty shell of an accommodation block? You know, it's sort of incredible. Students who finally got a room of their own, you know, and then they're forced back into a home, which may be a site of difficulty. A lot of students see university as an opportunity to that development stage. And then, of course, those with complex needs, disabilities. So a range of things, intangible losses that the two students have already mentioned, you know, the loss of rites of passage. I think of also the weak social ties, things like having a coffee after class, flirting, you know, a group emerging, spontaneous plans. Instead of that, we have to, you know, schedule in a Zoom meeting. I mean, it's not quite the same, is it? And then the university becoming a little bit of a strict parent, you know, saying you must not do this, right? And that sort of breeds, you know, we understand that, you know, we shouldn't do this. And as I was saying, but there's a part of us which sort of feels like, well, I want to go and dance and touch and interact. So I think that is there. And I think finally, I think perhaps is 2020 saw the brutality of our society and globally, you know, particularly for students of color that I was working with who were paralyzed by witnessing the inequities of our societies, the murder of George Floyd, the unequal toll of the pandemic on communities of color, and our profession actually finally beginning to do some work on representation. I think that's also been a big, maybe a slightly different point, but I think really important to recognize.
Do you think it came through in terms of people seeking therapy as well? Yeah.
I think so. Yes, I think that has been a step forward, and being able to have a conversation amongst the profession about making sure that we are sensitive to the different needs of our different communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Julia, your book, This Too Shall Pass, was published just as the pandemic was about to be announced in March of last year, and now your paperback's out, and there's a new final chapter to bring in the COVID experience. Why do you think that the pandemic seems to feel so bad for students, as opposed to, say, people of our age, which I feel quite a lot of people I know this didn't seem to mind it?
I mean, I think there are many reasons, and you know, I certainly agree with everything that has been said, is that there's a broad range, and those that were vulnerable before and had, you know, particular vulnerabilities, if they lived in poverty, if they came from an ethnic minority, if they had a physical problem, or they had pre-existing psychological problems, they were much more vulnerable and fared much worse. So I've seen some stats about young people, and they've all done worse. So as Simon was saying, the pre-existing inequalities have intensified. But the things that I think about from a sort of psychological perspective, meeting what has already been said, is that transition is difficult anyway. Stepping from home and family and familiarity and school into what is supposedly, although we think of emerging adulthood as not being fully until you're 28, but stepping into your adult self is a big transition, and all transitions are complex, and you have to kind of re-engage and reconnect with yourself and find new identities within yourself as this young person at university that has supposedly more freedoms, explores themselves, has sex with people in a way that you probably didn't maybe have freedom to before, tries things out. And all of that was stymied on the day of the Boris Johnson speech. And my term for that in the book is living losses. So the experience of them is exactly the same as grief, but they're losses, invisible losses of experiences, of structure, of trust in life, of hopes, of dreams, and what your expectations were. And the biggest thing that supports you through transitions, through difficulties, is the love and connection to others. And for young people, the biggest thing that they need isn't their mum and dad. They do not want, I mean, some may want to be, but most young people do not want to be with their mum and dad. They want to be with their peers. They want to find out who they are, from masses of conversations till 4 a.m, from coffee in the afternoon, from walks that go on forever, you know, the sitting down and not doing any of the things you're meant to be doing, but doing all the things you shouldn't be doing, which are much more fun. But they expand you and you grow from them and you discover yourself through it. Being shut in your home, in your bedroom, doing, you know, Zoom lectures without your peers whispering how awful the professor is, without knowing that you're going to go and have a pint afterwards, drains any of the joy of life. But it also has a massive psychological impact that you build a resilience from connection to others. We're wired to be relational. And, you know, going downstairs to the kitchen of your mum and dad, who they are fed up as well, they're drained of energy, is, you know, the whole level of your capacity to engage with life. And in life, we need to move in and step back. And it felt like we were pushed back, closed in and shut down, so that our sense of ourself was changed and felt imprisoned. And, you know, that has a big psychological role model. And I mean, I think the last thing to say is that those that were fortunate enough to have homes to go back to, they would have been influenced by how their parents role modeled managing the difficulty and the complexity of it, because we learn by observing the adults around us. And there were many, many battles around kitchen tables about what everybody agreed was okay and what wasn't okay, and what parents were role modeling, what children or young people were role modeling. And so where home may have been a place of safety, although through teenage years, it might also have been a place of complexity and difficulty, then it isn't the safe home that you want it to be. You kind of want to go home from university with your washing, lie on your bed, have a break, and not really have to engage with your mum and dad and go out and have holidays. But home became where everything was, and it loses its significance of a safe place and becomes a prison. And so I think that is very complicated.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that you're nodding.
There's a lot of nodding on the students. I know. One thing that strikes me, that if I heard about this, or if I thought of the prison analogy, what that would be like to be young and to be imprisoned like that, to not be able to be with your peers in that same sort of way, I would have thought one would fall into a low mood, depression. However, anxiety seems to be so high, and we see on the site so many people talking about anxiety is the key word that is used, and the other thing is panic attacks. Why do you think that has become, I mean, it's not as if it wasn't going on before this, but it seems to be very strong at the moment?
I mean, I don't know what Simon thinks and you think, but my understanding of it is that we were under threat. It was structural uncertainty. We were in a health pandemic where death seemed, you know, human beings who are normally the people you want to move towards and have a chat with and a hug were vectors of transmission of disease. The lack of safety felt very exposing and dangerous. And we had the contagion of the news and the numbers every day, which amped up our anxiety. And so our wired evolutionary response turned to code red, which it needs to do under threat. We are meant to go into fight or flight, not in this case freeze, in order to kind of see where the threat was. But the threat was invisible. The threat was happening in hospitals and care homes and, you know, people's homes, and we didn't see it. But what we imagined, of course, is limitless. So when we don't see it, our imagination takes flight and takes us to the most frightening places. And I think for young people, a lot of them believed they were immortal. And I think maybe, you know, I remember feeling I was totally immortal as I was doing incredibly stupid things. And I think for the first time, they recognized that their family members or that they could die, although the numbers were very low for young people. And the threat of actual death, I think and facing and thinking and talking about death, I think was also very frightening. And again, the single thing that helps you feel less anxious is relationships, is having fun, is being together. So we need circuit breakers for anxiety. You know, if we get very anxious, we need physical ways of winding ourselves down by breathing or exercise, but we also need hugs and eye contact and laughter and holding hands or whatever it is. And we didn't get the circuit breakers of the anxiety, so it amped up. One of the stats I saw from the Mental Health Foundation was that girls, young women, had more anxiety than men, that they fared worse in the pandemic. And I don't know if Libby has any thoughts about that.
I mean, I would say, again, for me personally, can't speak on behalf of all women, but I'm not a particularly anxious person. I'm fairly kind of easygoing. I don't have too many kind of, I guess, anxieties. But one thing I did really notice was I lost my father about nearly 9 years ago. And there was a period where my birthday's in November, and it was when things were beginning to get bad again. And I cancelled everything. And I was just like, I can't go out. I want to go see my mum, but I'm not. I cancelled everything. I didn't really have a birthday this year because, for me, because death has been a very real reality for me. I know that my perception of everything. I know I've been probably a bit more additionally cautious. I know I have been, because I know, I was faced with this proposition of, what if I lost my mum? If I lose my mum, I've lost everything. I've lost everybody. I've got a younger brother, and then who's that bigger person that's meant to look after me? So I definitely, despite not normally having anxiety, I would definitely say there was an increase in my anxiety 100%, and I'm not a particularly anxious person.
Can I just add in from a kind of grief perspective is that I think what also happened, and has clearly happened with you, is if you have experienced loss in the past, this new loss as a living loss, as it was, is a threat. You can't not know that people can die, and you know it in your lived experience and body. So whatever anyone tells you, that it was unlikely that your mom would die because she wasn't in the most risky age, you can't not know that, because your experience is young. My father, when I was young, he was young, he died. So I can't not know that my mum could die.
Yeah, 100%. The reality, death is very real for me, and it, hasn't kind of, and I'm not, and that was what was so kind of difficult for me to navigate, is that prior to COVID, I'm not an anxious person. I wasn't thinking, oh my gosh, what if my mum dies? I hadn't really, in actual fact, I hadn't really properly thought about losing my mum, to be honest, until this all happened. And it's something that I've just always kind of, pushed to one side. I'll deal with that if and when I need to, kind of thing. But this was a situation that really, kind of slapped you around the face and was like, look, this could happen again. And 100% people, whilst it might be with good intention, people wanting to reassure you and say, oh, but it's fine. And it's like, it might not be fine. And I know that it might not be fine. And so that was very difficult. Yeah, for sure.
Ras.I, can I just ask you, I think I'm right in thinking that you actually had coronavirus. Is that right? So how did that make you feel?
I think it's an interesting one. I think for ages, my fear kind of lied with fear for my mum, fear for her health. Again, she's not in a risk category, but it was kind of fear for herself, and I wasn't really concerned about myself or my own health. but I think the bits that that were, I think, the most impactful was in relation to kind of social relationships. So I got COVID at the time where I came back to uni. And it was the day after. I was here like a week early, helping to run like the kind of the foundation year. They've got like a week before everyone else to come, and I was helping to run there. And someone unfortunately passed on COVID to me and to two others, three others, correction. And we were all in isolation one day into like Freshers Week. And I think the part which I found most stressful and gave me the most anxiety was kind of relation to social anxiety. And it was something that rather than the actual health kind of implications, but no, it's something that I kind of struggled with before, like a couple years back, kind of to a far extent, but kind of it got better. And I think this kind of surprised me and shocked me, because it realized actually how vulnerable I was to all of those past thoughts I had gone to counseling for, and I tried to move on from this kind of feeling, well, you know, I'm in isolation from 2 weeks at the kind of the most important stage and kind of in this year is freshers and meeting new people and kind of, you know, trying to, you know, make new friends as well, and also feeling like the old friends as well, in the back of my mind thinking, well, maybe if they've moved on or whatever, which they hadn't. The reality was that they hadn't, and there was nothing necessarily to suggest that they would have, by their character or the way they, you know, the way they acted. But it was this kind of thought in my room, completely isolated, separated from my mum, who had throughout my whole life has been my lifeline. You know, kind of now in a place where, and the first few days I didn't have any food or anything. Partly, you know, I hadn't gone to Tesco, and there was no way of getting food. So I kind of just, I didn't have food. I had some snacks that I brought. So I kind of lived off that partly, and also was just sleeping a lot of the time anyway. So it wasn't too bad. I kind of had sleep for dinner. But the kind of, I guess the fear in that kind of being in this, it's a bigger room than the one I have at home, but you know, kind of being in this kind of tight space where I can't really get fresh air, I can't go outside, I don't have any movement, you know, I'm stuck here, and the other members of my household, I can't interact with them either, because we can't even be in the same place at the same time if I want to go and use the shared facilities or whatever. So it was that kind of that kind of fear and letting those thoughts ruminate when I was kind of alone, those kind of fears of social anxiety, but kind of away from the health sides, but it was more about the kind of the wider impacts from me being away from everyone, that for me was the kind of most impactful and the most scary.
Thanks, Ras.I. Simon, I wondered if you have an opinion about how well, and I know this is a very general question, but how well do you think the universities have been handling, you know, counselling during this time?
Yeah, my experience was that we reacted pretty quickly, and there was a sort of general sense of okay, we're online, and pretty much overnight, the service I was working in at the time, until 2020, switched to Zoom, and that I think has been welcomed, although it would be very interesting to hear from students about how they've experienced Zoom counselling, and we need, I'm sure, to do research on what it's like, the lived experience of those students. But I think also, yeah, that this happened to universities that were already pretty stressed. You know, their universities are stressed institutions. The staff are exhausted. They suddenly, staff, faculty had to create 3 different lectures online, you know, and I think students felt that, and that can feel a bit sort of shaky, you know, where this new place, which should be this sort of secure base, this idea that you can come and learn and explore, actually the institution is a bit rocky. So yes, there are waiting lists, and some of those are quite long, brief number of sessions, and I think generally something about the university cultures which is quite reactive to mental health. I know there is a lot of excellent work being done across the BACP university divisions, and there is a vibrant, I think, sort of wish to improve university counselling culture, but the university themselves, I think, are quite stressed, and there's probably too narrow a focus, I think, still on academic achievement, which then generates anxiety, competitiveness, ceaseless working, and a fanaticism of, which is very insidious for mental health.
I mean, I just want to let any of the people watching this, thinking about, the possibility of counselling at Welldoing. Just in the last couple of months, we've created a matching service for students, because we know that these waiting lists are very long in counselling services. And we're making it possible by a portion of our therapists, including Simon actually, have agreed to see students for a low cost, starting at £25 for online counselling. And we're really keen to get that known about, although it's quite difficult to get the universities themselves engaged with that, but we will keep trying. Julia, I wanted to ask, I wondered if you felt one of the lockdown things, and perhaps it doesn't relate so much to students, but this idea that people should be able to do things. They should have been able to read all these books or write all these essays or create a new dance or, just incredible things, because after all, you've had a year and you probably weren't doing much. And, why was your creativity not sparked by this great opportunity? And I wonder what you thought about why it is that people, are so ready to blame themselves like that and so hard on themselves, when actually it's a worldwide pandemic, the like of which we haven't seen in 100 years. It's actually a pretty good reason to not do anything much.
I mean, I think one of the kind of bad designs of us human beings, and I don't know if the others would agree, is that we have this negative bias, which is there to protect us from danger, to look for the sort of tiger that's going to come at us. But when we're suffering, we turn that negative bias, or we tend to turn it against ourselves. So rather than recognizing you're living in a global pandemic, your arousal system is in gear 4, so you're all wired on amygdala. Your capacity to think creatively, do things creatively, kind of follow your structure is completely offline. And kind of recognize and turn to yourself with self-compassion, which is the thing that would most support you. You have what I call a shitty committee, which is you just turn you against yourself, accusing yourself, like, I'm so rubbish, I'm so useless, why haven't I read Tolstoy and Dostoevsky? This is when I was going to do it. And then that amps up your anxiety, and then it becomes this horrible cycle that then kind of meets you as you wake up in the morning. And the work is to be aware of the voice in your head, like, because often it's so part of us we don't even know that we're doing it. So even something like journaling really helps you kind of recognize what you are saying to yourself. And small practices, circuit breakers of sort of 2 or 3 minutes of turning to yourself with self-compassion, breathing, slowing down. I mean, the biggest help, I think, for self-attack and anxiety is therapy, of course, but going outside, even in the pouring, blooming rain in November, like getting out when you're not isolating.
Yeah.
Nature is a natural healer in whatever the weather. Moving your body around lowers the cortisol. It tells you you've flown. It expands you don't feel so imprisoned. It expands your view of the world, and that expands your view of yourself. So even if you only do it for 10 minutes, you come back and you feel better. And then intentionally doing something that soothes you, in my case, it's a cup of tea, then you have more openness to doing something that gives you pleasure. And then that may mean that you're more productive.
Simon, what about those other things people use to kind of turn things off, like, drugs, alcohol, sex?
They'd be lucky. That would have been the choice.
Yeah.
But you know, I think certainly a lot of people I knew in the first bit of it, you know, that seemed to be the answer. And then in the sort of middle period, that clearly wasn't the answer. You know, they were sort of realizing that they actually were going down. Were you seeing students like that as well, or does it not happen so much with students?
I think, you know, we see these behaviors routinely, you know, pre-pandemic, during the pandemic. And I think all of the speakers have touched on something which I think, which partly what you're talking about, I think is the sort of cycle of the pandemic, the excitement, the hyper arousal at the beginning, the anxiety. And I felt more recently, there's a sort of energetic slump, exhaustion, depletion. And I think that we are probably beginning a phase now of almost, I think Susie Orbach the other day called it a sort of social depression. And I wonder a bit about the depressive stuff that we don't see as much. Anxiety is louder, isn't it? Depression is an inward process. So yeah, I think we will see, and I do see eating, disordered eating, and things such as that are on the rise now.
That's alarming.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And what about Libby? Is there anything like that rings a bell for you? You know, the sort of, in terms of, I suppose I would say the boredom. I used to find it just so boring that I felt like, you know, why shouldn't I have a giant glass of wine? It's so boring. But you know, is that true in the kind of student world, would you say?
I would say I'm a little bit different. Like, if I'm being complete, I don't drink loads. I don't kind of, with everything with my dad, it's kind of really, I've had quite a lot of counselling, and I've had quite a lot of kind of, I don't know, I'm fairly self-aware, if I'm being completely honest. And I just kind of, I really toned down my drinking a couple of years ago, because when I first joined uni, it was a recipe for disaster, to put it lightly. And so that was something, thankfully, I had kind of nipped
You dealt with,
a couple of years prior. My mum is not a huge drinker, so that wasn't really the case for me. I know for my friend, a lot of my friends, it was a completely different situation. But I would say more harmless than anything, if I'm gonna, but that's again just my friends. For other people, I'm sure it was a completely different situation. But for me, I hate being still. So for me, the whole boredom thing was like, if I don't feel like I'm being as productive as I possibly can, I feel really, I internalize that, and I definitely kind of, and so with everything with COVID, I, you know, was working about 4 days a week at Greg's as one of the the senior team leaders, and, you know, was doing ridiculous hours and doing my uni work and doing, you know, this kind of like, oh, I can do so much stuff. I can squeeze I've got 25 hours in a day as opposed to 24. And having to stop, I couldn't stop. And it was a really kind of, it was really difficult, because I couldn't pop out. There was nowhere to go. There's nowhere to, do you know what I mean? All of my kind of coping mechanisms of keeping myself busy and all of that kind of stuff, even though I am self-aware and like I've had my counselling and stuff, you know, for different people, it maybe becomes drinking or an eating disorder. For me, it's changed a lot this past year, which is something I'm grateful for. But it was a real kind of thing of, I just have to be busy, and I was just doing just like silly stuff, like just tiny but loads of small silly stuff. And I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And then I read something actually where, because I always love listening to podcasts and all that kind of stuff, and I read something where it said I think it was hyper productivity is and can be like a bit of a trauma response to things that you've been through. And that kind of really, and I'd never seen or read that before, and I was like, that's what I'm doing.
You recognize that?
Yeah. So then I've had to slow down, which has actually been good for me.
I mean, I wondered sort of generally if there are people who think there are good things that have come out of the COVID pandemic. Ras.I, have you got anything that you think is good?
Well, I think something that's good, I think, is time to think, because I think really it's truly a luxury. I think time to think, and I think no, I think one of the realizations I had when coming to uni and kind of studying philosophy is that the luxury of the time to think is something which is truly a privilege, and I realized how my whole life that privilege was absent from my life, partly from my own kind of decisions in reaction to past trauma, but also just by the sheer fact of the chaos of my life. And I think what the pandemic allowed me to do, and allowed so many to do, was give them time to think, actually, to process, to think, you know, who do I want to be? Who am I right now? Where am I going in my life? This moment of stillness, which I think at first was quite frightening, because we have time with our own thoughts, and that can be something that can be quite detrimental. But I think in other ways it can be something that can build us up, and allow us that time to process, actually. Especially in a modern life where things are so quick, absolutely quick, and everything is always changing. We're always on the go, and we never really have time to kind of take a step back and say, you know, what's going on in my life, you know. And we realize actually all these different things that we truly value, how much we value other people, how much we value the little things that kind of give us joy. For me, one of those things was commuting. You know, I often listen to podcasts or I read when I commute, to school or to meet my friends or whatever, and just having that removed was not something that I necessarily anticipated I would miss, but I realized how much I missed it, how many of these small things give me joy, and I realize them now, and I'm able to actually actively try to seek out those small things where I can, of course, as lockdown is slowly kind of relaxed. But I think in that time to think, I was able to, in my own life, to kind of recognize at first, all right, you know, I thought I had come far further with my mental health than I actually had. And although that was a kind of a sad realization, it was positive in the sense I realized, actually, no, I need to still seek help. I still need to improve. This isn't a battle which is just kind of over. Actually, the different things that are happening, and seeing the murder of George Floyd, seeing the kind of this pain from across the globe, and feeling this pain kind of also make me realize there's different societal issues also that we haven't yet addressed. And I think those are some good aspects that have come out of the pandemic in this time to think. And I think also, kind of in relation to that time to think, I think partly why BLM, the resurgence of the BLM movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, has been so successful is that people have had time to think. You know, it isn't just that life kind of moves on as normal, you know, where we see the murders of other people, which has happened consistently for years and years and years. But we see it, we stop for a moment, we realize, oh, this is really sad, and we just move on with our life because life moves on. And now we have this moment of stillness. We have this moment to reflect and to actually think for ourselves, away from other people, and think independently and think, okay, why is this bad? Is this right? You know, what do we want and what do we value in a society? And I think those are some really good aspects that have come out of the pandemic, for all the bad that has come out of it.
Yeah, well said, Ras.I. I think a lot of people would agree with you, and I think it's probably true that without that pause of the pandemic, it would have just been another death in police custody kind of thing. Simon, I wonder what you think should be said to young people today, because about the future, because the truth is, just as I was preparing for this on the 6 o'clock news, it was Boris Johnson worries that the Indian variant may mean another lockdown. I was just like, oh my God. But the truth is, we have to live with risk all the time. So what do you tell people that can make it easier for them?
I think I also sort of just mentioned a little take on what, as I was saying about thinking and actually choosing what we think about, what we pay attention to. I heard a lovely conversation this week about an idea of a tech Shabbat, a sort of idea from Jewish culture where the Saturday, I think, is completely free of any technology. And in the conversation, there was this sense of what it is like to have analog experiences. So no screens, no Wi-Fi, no distraction, no news, because we do that doom scrolling, don't we? We're hooked into the dopamine hit of, and some of the experiences Julia mentioned of just sort of bringing our system down, being bored, creating space to think. We can actually do that in our daily lives, I think, and maybe that's a bit much, a whole day off, but I think that is one thing. Nature, I totally agree with. And then maybe the other thing I'd say, we talk a lot about self-care, and that's very important, but also maybe something about getting over ourselves, something about getting involved in community, getting involved in causes bigger than the I. Who knows what that will be for people, but I think that is volunteering, stuff like that, engaging in the climate crisis, engaging in social activism is something that we can look forward to.
Okay, that's interesting. Libby, we're drawing to the close, but I know that I wanted to ask you a bit about, you've mentioned the loss of your father 9 years ago. I wondered if you could tell us a bit about this dissertation that you're doing on post-traumatic growth. Explain to people what it is, and then I wanted to ask Julia, who specialises in grief counselling, what she thought about it.
Yeah, of course. So I feel so PTSD is obviously kind of within the mainstream popular culture. It's used in all kind of different contexts now, and is known obviously post-traumatic stress disorder. But about a year ago, I was doing a module and I came across post-traumatic growth, and I was like, when something jumps out at you and you're like, I have to read up on that. I don't know what that is, but I need to read more about it. Anyway, came to do my dissertation and I was like, I'm going to explore that. What is that? Because even though it is fairly self-explanatory, but I thought there's something really, really interesting here, something that I also haven't really heard anything about. And essentially, so it was coined back in, I can't remember the exact date, but mid kind of 90s by these two sociologists, Richard Tedeschi and Lawrence Calhoun. And they were at first looking more at, I think grief was like their main bulk of their first part of their research. And then it kind of began to look into the whole concept of post-traumatic growth, of experiencing some sort of positive transformation after something traumatic, whether it's losing a parent or whether it is even COVID. That's a trauma, collective trauma in itself, or lots of other different things, but how the resilience that you can gain from the adversity can be incredibly transformative. And I know from my own experience, everything had been through with my dad, and it was so much bigger than just losing him. There was so many other things, is that it's kind of, it's really, it sounds cliche, but it's made me into the person that I am today. And it's given me strengths, and perspective is a huge thing for me. Like the way I look at things is completely different to if I hadn't have experienced all of that trauma. So essentially, it's basically about all of the exciting, amazing things that can happen that often isn't shared when you've gone through something traumatic. And that is by no means to menialize or, not make light of the pain of whatever the trauma is that someone's maybe gone through, but it's kind of presenting an alternative narrative and an alternative way of being that, within my research and stuff that I've done, has shown that, you know, if people are shown that that you can be a different way after grief or after anything like that, that people are more likely to then engage with those kind of things or those thoughts or all of these kind of things. And yeah, it's just, I could talk about it for ages, but that's basically what it is. But yeah.
Okay, thanks, Libby. Julia, have you got any thoughts about that?
Look, I've got lots.
Yeah, let's hear some.
Well, I mean, post-traumatic growth, as you say, came from Calhoun and Tedeschi, and then there's a lot of other people who've done the work on it. The one in England worked in a English university in Manchester, Stephen Joseph. And what they talk about is very much what you're saying, Libby, is that in order to process grief, pain is the agent of change. We have to face the reality of the loss and allow the natural grieving process to change us, to adapt us and change to this new version of ourselves that we are post the death. But of course, trauma isn't adaptive. So we have to do the work of dealing with the trauma first. And there are many different versions of trauma now. Before, it used to be just from, say, the Marshall disaster or 9/11. But now we talk about transgenerational trauma, fragments of trauma through behaviors, through our parents, and many other things. But once we've dealt with the trauma through, the most common is EMDR, eye movement desensitization processing, well, the best researched, we process the grief and it never diminishes the level of the loss or the enormity of the loss. And of course, the grief takes much longer than anyone wants. But what people have found is that when they have faced their grief, they've allowed it to change them. They find that they are more resilient and stronger in their life because they've survived something they thought they could never survive. Their perception of what matters in the world and gives them meaning is changed. And often they become more altruistic. And as Simon was saying, altruism is a very positive aspect of our well-being, that when we help others, we're helped. And so that when people talk about post-traumatic growth, they still feel the pain of the loss, but they do feel that in the process of change, as it has come through them, that feels like growth.
Thanks, Julia. That's interesting. We're getting near the end, but I just wanted to ask you, Ras.I, you know, you're at one of the oldest universities in the land, you know, in some ways a very, very conventional sort of place. Do you think that somewhere like Oxford will be changed by this experience? And in the long run, what do you think, especially young people, will learn from the COVID period?
Wow, that's a great question. I think one of I was going to add, I forgot to mention it, was I think one of the kind of key benefits of the pandemic is the realization of the difficulty of mental health, and the kind of the difficulty that comes from mental health issues, and how actually susceptible we are to mental health issues. And I think it's become this undeniable fact, because it's something that we've to some extent, or either experienced ourselves or seen others close to us or in relative proximity to us experience. And again, in this moment of stillness, we have to grapple with these ideas. You know, seeing your family, your brothers or sisters, your parents, or whoever you live with, or yourself, you know, perhaps experiencing it, you know, kind of struggling to get out of bed in the morning, you know, and not really understanding perhaps why, you know, having all the reasons to, knowing what all the facts are, reasons why you should, but not physically being able to because you don't have the mental capacity to. And I think this kind of realization of how actually impactful, you know, your mind can actually be on what you're able to do, makes this kind of undeniable thing to address, to truly address. And I think the university, this university and universities across the country and wider in society, I think has to address this. And I think if it doesn't, it will truly, truly, truly be a loss. And I think it's a perfect opportunity. And I think if it doesn't address it, I think it's doing a disservice not just to the students now, but to the future as well. You know, this idea that you have academics and people to strive in industry and in different fields in the world, and not provide them the pure basis to kind of understand and comprehend and cope with the stresses of life, not just normal life, but also academic life, which compounds normal stress in a lot of instances. So I do think, hopefully, the university will change. This university will change, and universities across the country will also change, in order to kind of to understand students better. You know, I think a lot of academics also struggle to comprehend the idea that there's something outside of academia, you know, that they're teaching to their students. There's something more to this. There is other aspects of life than just the subject. Because I think often a lot of tutors, which I've seen, my tutors are amazing, but a lot of the times, you know, I think it's hard to understand, well, why wouldn't you want to do this? Why wouldn't you want to spend, you know, all your time focusing on this? Because it's really interesting, which it is, but life is about more than just that. And I think in the pandemic, I think by experiencing that directly and seeing that directly, I think people are faced with that reality. There's kind of older tutors and older teachers and whatever, who are kind of hardened by these ideas of tradition, now realize, actually, you know, maybe I do need to start accepting these new ideas. So I think there's this kind of room for progression. And I think with other students also, the kind of lesson to be learned is actually to kind of be more compassionate with others, you know, because of seeing how mental health can be, you know, really easily influenced and how impactful it can be in your life. I think that there's this kind of understanding for us as the next generation, almost to take that into our teachings with our friends, with our peers, but also in our families, in our workplaces, and to kind of take those on and really champion those causes. So I think that's an amazing lesson to be learned from it.
Thanks, Ras.I. Yeah, sorry, Julia. Yeah.
Can I add in? I mean, what the research shows, and in a way you've brilliantly said, is that young people are much more open and aware of their mental health. They have much more emotional intelligence and a language to talk about their mental health. There's much less shame. And something like Mental Health Awareness Week like this does raise that level of discussion. Even with young people, there is a barrier to actually seeking help. I don't know if Simon will agree, but there's a sort of feeling like, no, I'm going to ignore it. I'm going to do all the things to avoid it, you know, whether it's busyness as an anesthetic or drinking or drugs or whatever it is. And that what we also know very clearly from the research is that the earlier the intervention, the sooner you get the help, the better your outcome. And my shout to the young people listening to this would be that now is a brilliant time to sort your shit out, because you are not so locked in and kind of habit formed and creaky as someone as old as me, so that you are naturally more adaptive and flexible, and so you will more naturally grow. You will, but also it will mean that you kind of people who don't address their difficulties, they go on and make the mistakes over and over and over, and that affects their outcomes long term, their mental health. And of course, your mental health affects your physical health. Those two affect your work life. So people talk about your lifespan. So all of your outcomes are damaged if you don't get help. So I'm not saying everybody has a mental health condition. We all live on a spectrum. But if you recognize within yourself that even there's something that is kind of just bothering you at one end or really bad at another end, I would access the support you can as soon as you can.
Thanks very much, Julia. And thank you, Simon. Thank you, Ras.I. Thank you, Libby. This was great, a really great talk, and I hope you enjoyed it too. And thank you very much to Native for inviting us to do it. Bye-bye.
Bye.